705, 725, 780, and 988. These 4 books combine for over 3,000 pages and over 1 million words. And I liked all 4 of these books, but I didn't love all 4 of these books. So today I wanted to talk about why some long books work better than others. The simple answer is that a good book is a good book. Page count doesn't matter. So I guess that's the end of the video. Well, just one more thing. A simple thought experiment. If I were to offer you one of 2 books, I don't give you the genre, the author, or any indication of quality. The only differentiator between these 2 mystery books is that one is 400 pages and the other is 800 pages. My hypothesis is that more people would take the 400-page book. So why is that? A short book can focus on doing 1 or 2 things really well, whereas a long book has to incorporate more elements and then balance those elements. When it works, it can come together to form an epic journey that becomes one of our all-time favorite books. But often, they fall just a little bit short. And the longer the book, the greater the opportunity cost. So I've picked 4 long books to compare. The sci-fantasy space opera Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, the historical fiction space opera Ilium by Dan Simmons, the African-inspired cyberpunk City of Golden Shadow by Tad Williams, and the slightly harder sci-fi space opera Pandora's Star by Peter F. Hamilton. And at the end of the video, I'll be spinning the quantum wheel to find out which patron pick I'll be reading in the month of October. All 4 of these books are science fiction, so we can somewhat compare apples to apples. But the components that I want to talk about, I think are applicable across genres. And the first component that a lot of people are concerned about when it comes to long books is pacing. Personally, I enjoy fast-paced books, but I do want to clarify that I don't think fast pacing means good pacing, or that slow pacing means bad pacing. Instead, I want to introduce a theory of mine that every chapter should either advance and/or enhance the story. Any scene that moves the story along or adds to the richness of the story is justifying those pages. Any scene that is irrelevant or repetitive or uninteresting can be cut. Now, of course, this is subjective and every reader's experience will differ, but the longer the book, the longer or deeper the story needs to be in order to provide a story that consistently will enhance or advance the reading experience. None of these 4 books are super fast-paced, but I would describe Empire of Silence as medium-paced, as it does a good job of taking our main character Hadrian from place to place, while still taking the time to establish the characters and world, which I think is necessary in book 1 of a series. On the other end of the scale, City of Golden Shadow is a rather slow-paced book. The narrative threads that you follow at the beginning of the book are the same ones that you're still following at the end of the book. Is the lack of advancement made up for with enhancement? Well, for me, yes and no. I did enjoy the character development as well as the contrasting cultures, but other scenes felt repetitive and it didn't quite enhance the world enough in order to make up for the slow progression. Somewhere in between the 2 for me is Ilium and Pandora's Star. In Ilium, we have a crazy world with gods and robots and aliens, and I enjoyed learning about them in the downtime in between major plot points. When it comes to Pandora's Star, we also have a very interesting world with wormholes, but some of the backstory didn't feel quite entirely necessary. Something else that affects the pacing is the mechanisms through which we transition from beat to beat. I remember watching a video from the creators of South Park, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, where they said that scenes should never be connected with the phrase "and then." For example, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. Rather, they should be connected with therefore or but then. For example, this happens, therefore this happens, but then this happens. This creates a cause and effect, and watching characters pursue their goals and tackle hurdles is rewarding for the reader. When chapters just flow from one to the next without clear stakes or purpose, the story lacks momentum and the pacing feels flat. This is something that I thought was done successfully in Empire of Silence. Our main character, Hadrian Marlowe, is young and opinionated. He makes strong decisions, and sometimes he succeeds, and sometimes he fails. And that creates for a satisfying narrative. When it came to City in Golden Shadow, the first act introduced some great mysteries, but as the story went on, we had a lot of scenes that ended with some variant of "we still don't know," or "we have to keep going," and Over time, this started to feel a little bit repetitive and provided diminishing returns. So the next element I wanted to talk about was POVs. In a longer book, you have the opportunity to flesh out more storylines and perspectives. But should you? In Empire of Silence, we follow just one POV, told in the first person by our main character, Hadrian. And telling a long story, in fact an entire series, from just one character's perspective is potentially risky, because if you don't enjoy that character's perspective, it might make it hard to enjoy the entire series. Fortunately, I found Hadrian to be a rich and complex character that developed significantly over time. I also like the fact that within this epic universe with many planets and aliens and technologies and factions and mysteries, we had that singular perspective of Hadrian in order to anchor all of that together. Moving on to Ilium, this book follows 3 POVs. A resurrected scholar following the Battle of the Trojan War on Mars, which is told in the first person, then a storyline following humans, a group of humans thousands of years in the future, which is told in the third person, and then some Moravec robots in space, also told in the third person. This sounds complex, and it is. This is an ambitious book, and not everything landed for me, but something that I did appreciate was how each of these stories balanced each other out. There were times where I might not have particularly enjoyed the characters that I was following, but I was enjoying the themes and concepts and storylines. Whereas there were other times where the plot we were following might not have been as exciting, but I did like spending time with those particular characters. Both Pandora's Star and City of Golden Shadow follow around 5 or 6 main storylines, and this can be a little tricky at first as you start the novels, as you try to remember all of the different characters that you've been introduced to. City of Golden Shadow is a little bit simpler to follow in this regard because the main storyline we follow in about half the chapters, and then the other half is split between the supporting cast. I don't think one approach is better than the other, it's just a question of width versus depth. If you have really strong characters, then I probably won't mind spending a lot of time with fewer characters. Whereas if your story is more elaborate than your characters, then I might enjoy a wider variety of perspectives. So the next thing I want to talk about is the way in which authors go about providing information. Sometimes I think that authors don't want to overload readers, and that makes sense especially with a long book. And they think that withholding information will increase the suspense and add to the mystery. However, I often find the opposite to be true. To me, the most fun mysteries are the ones where we are given a series of clues, and as we navigate the twists and turns of the story, collecting pieces, eventually we have enough in order to put the puzzle together. Readers don't want to be spoon-fed, but if you have the same amount of puzzle pieces that you did 600 pages ago, you might not be having a lot of fun with that puzzle. And that's one of the reasons why I'm typically more drawn to science fiction than I am to fantasy. Now, this isn't applicable to every sci-fi or fantasy book, but here's my impression of how sometimes mysteries are treated in sci-fi and fantasy. Wow, that thing that just happened was pretty weird. Not that weird if you're familiar with quantum physics. Fine, I'll start from the beginning. Every particle has a superposition. Wow, that thing that just happened was pretty weird. Yes, the prophecy from the shadow of our brothers has begun. What does that mean, exactly? I shall explain in book 5 or 6. No, I'm just teasing fantasy a bit there, but to be honest, all 4 of these science fiction books are a little bit guilty of that as well. I think if a mystery is central to your story, then bits of information should be provided a little bit faster if you don't want to lose tension in the story. And for me, that was somewhat the case with Pandora's Star and City of Golden Shadow. If the mysteries are secondary to the main story, then I don't mind them being teased out a little bit longer in the background, and I felt like that was the case with Empire of Silence and Ilium, so it didn't bother me too much. The second last thing I wanted to talk about was whether each of these books contain satisfying story arcs. They are all a part of a series, but to what extent are they enjoyable on their own? Empire of Silence is part of the Sun Eater series. 5 books have been released so far, and the penultimate book is coming out in April. Empire of Silence does feel like part 1 or book 1 of a series, but it does a good job of completing its own story arc while setting up a larger story for the rest of the series. When it comes to Ilium, this is the first book in a duology, and while you definitely do need to read the sequel Olympos in order to complete the main story arc, I felt like Ilium did have a nice climax and came to a somewhat natural breaking point before setting things up to continue with Olympos. Pandora's Star and City of Golden Shadow are a little bit different. Pandora's Star and Judas Unchained, the sequel in the Commonwealth Saga duology, combine essentially to form a 2,000-page story that feels like it was cut in half. The same goes for City of Golden Shadow. I haven't read the other 3 books in the series yet, but this did feel like part 1 of a single story arc. And that's not necessarily a problem if you are committed to reading all 4 books in the series, but Book 1 in and of itself is quite long. It's quite the commitment, so some readers might want a little bit more of a payoff. And the final thing I wanted to touch on is the author's prose. If you're going to spend 600, 800, or 1,000 pages with a particular author, it definitely helps if you enjoy their writing style. Fortunately, I think this is an area where Rocchio, Simmons, and Williams all succeeded. I found them to be beautifully descriptive writers and found there to be plenty of memorable lines. Hamilton, I thought his writing got the job done and it didn't take away from the reading experience, but I found him to be perhaps a little bit less distinct than the other 3. I should also note that both Simmons and Hamilton are somewhat guilty of some awkward and cringy intimate scenes, and that won't be for everyone. So there you go, those are 4 long books and why I enjoyed them varying amounts. If I had to rank them, I would go Empire of Silence, Ilium, Pandora's Star, then City of Golden Shadow. But I did enjoy all of them to some degree. Let me know your thoughts on these and what makes a chunky book work for you. Now let's find out if the next book I'll be reading is another chunky one as I spin the Quantum Wheel. Welcome to the Quantum Wheel, where all of the patron picks are both simultaneously picked and not picked until we observe a winner. Let's find out what I'll be reading in the month of October. Spin, Quantum Wheel, spin. What have you got for me this month? It looks like Steel World, maybe? Or will it tick over? Oh, it ticked over! Oh my goodness. The 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, a Philip K.D. book. So I've read 4 PKD books. This will be my 5th. I'm quite the fan. So I'm looking forward to this one. This is supposed to be a good PKD book. So if you're interested, pick it up and join me in the month of October. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash or just gently click the subscribe button, and if you really enjoyed it, check out my Patreon memberships, where you can become a robot, android, or cyborg like Nima in A New Eden, and you can find more sci-fi content over here.